Thank you very much to all of you and for expressing your interest and and willingness to be part of this panel discussion. So we have been doing a series of panel discussion, and this is our fourth discussion. A very important concern that we will be discussing, that is inequalities during the COVID times. Let me introduce the speakers. So we have today Ashima with us. She's the co-founder and editor of Life of Science. We have Koil, Managing Trustee, Safa for Equality. We have Kumar Shelab, Co-Director HUC, and we have Rituparna. She's the co-founder and co-director Nazaria.
Ashima, would you like to share with us the
Yes,
life of science work? Yes. And you
sure.
choose the areas you'd like to focus on. So thanks very much. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Poonam. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Ashima, and I've been looking at and reporting from the Indian science community for about 4 or 5 years now, as part of the lifeofscience.com project, which Santan is also part of. And recently, of course, we also wanted to look at COVID because from the community that we're connected with, we've been hearing a lot of distress and frustration. There are many voices that are coming from there, and also apathy from the so we did a webinar also, which was public. Sorry, my internet is not working so good, so I'll turn off the
Yeah.
video.
So that's why I guess we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did a webinar last month, and we invited women scientists from different levels of scientific work. And we wanted a lot of early career fellows there because we know that that's the group that is most impacted. And then I did some further investigations, and I've been looking at this whole thing, like the dialogue around it, both internationally and nationally. So maybe I can share a little bit about what I've found. So firstly, the important topic is that access to research itself has halted and for many researchers. And bulk of these scientists, early career researchers, are doing field work. So the access to field has not been around. Like there is, of course, many reasons for that. One is, of course, travel restrictions that we've heard that during the lockdown, there was a blanket ban on all public transport. So researchers that go out and collect data could not do that. And even when public transport restarted, which was actually very recently, not all people, especially women scientists, and don't feel exactly safe to access public transport. We've also heard of, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. We've also heard of instances of police brutality during the lockdown when field researchers were out there collecting data for their work. Which of course, all of this, the travel restrictions, the not feeling safe enough to go out there, even when the lockdown has lifted, and police brutality, all of this disproportionately impacts women, especially young women, who have just recently committed to the work of scientific research. And I want to mention specifically this area of science that has been impacted is ecology. and specifically researchers who study bats or their ecology have actually been asked to not continue that work anymore because of a fear that, of course, there is a good chance that the virus actually came from bats, from proximity to bats. But halting this research, and then what happens to the people who and their students who are involved in research with bats, is unclear, and not a lot of explanation was provided. And also there has to be, we have to ask questions about if this decision was based on evidence that it is really unsafe to continue bat research. Having said this, that access to research itself is impacting young women, I want to say that all of this is happening in an environment where there is a severe gender gap in Indian science. So we have data, of course, only of the binary gender, so women and men. And the numbers are that there are only 14% women in this space, and the rest are all men. And so what we are hearing from both senior and early career researchers is that the pandemic is creating added pressures, and this is going to make the gender gap wider. It's putting more pressure on the existing inequalities and biases that exist in Indian science. If that has to do with grants, or if that has to do with what they call a triple burden in science, where you are burdened with your domestic duties, with having a job, and unique challenges that come with doing science. Yeah, so all of this access to blocked access to research, laboratories, field work, etc., is we are fearing is going to have a lasting impact on the gender gap that is already quite wide in India. And thirdly, I want to say that we are not really seeing adequate or even any support from institutions. Worse off, some young researchers who were, graduate students who were considering PhD work, etc., have told us that they were taken out of projects because they could not appear in the lab as soon as the lockdown was lifted. So people are losing positions, and all of these things will impact, of course, is impacting everybody, but young women will suffer more because their experience gets, it's difficult for them anyway, is what I want to say. There is not a lot of support even for healthcare that's being provided. In fact, PhD students and master students were asked to leave hostels, were asked to vacate hostels in many instances while the lockdown was ongoing. So this is the exact opposite of what we can ask for, is what's happening right now. So the situation is quite severe, and amid all these pressures, I think the dropout ratio that we see, so in India, we have in higher education in science, up to bachelor's level, we now almost see 50-50 of men and women accessing scientific higher education. But as you go further up, there is a very high dropout ratio. And we think that the dropout ratio is going to be much worse this year and the next year. But how will we know all this? But because nobody is really collecting data. The official studies on women in science by the Indian government are now at least 3 years old. I'm not sure if there's new work coming up. I haven't heard of any. so what is also the official take of, from the state? What's really there? Are they assessing the impact of the pandemic? There are signs that they are at least trying to be seen as assessing the impact of the pandemic on women in science. There was a press release from the DBT and another one from the STIP, which is a weird private public body that wants to make a science policy for the coming years for the country, which also looked at COVID and women in science. But really there was no, it wasn't clear, no study was announced, no results of a study were announced, and there is very little engagement. So what we would ask for is firstly, gender and sex disaggregated data for people who are doing science in the country, and also people specifically working on COVID. A lot of studies that have been done abroad have shown that women are publishing less than they were before. And our attempts to do, like we did a very small study with some of our friends who look at data, and they also found initial trends that research productivity, at least in preprint servers, etc., it seems that women are publishing less than they usually do. And I'm not sure if there is a lot of even acknowledgement that the pandemic makes is exacerbating the gender gap in India in science, and what are the plans to support these people. I want to end by saying that I really wish that, like when I'm talking to a lot of the women, especially senior women, there is a frustration that, okay, we are not placed in committees. There's a lot of tokenism in higher committees. But there is no single voice. And this is what we've tried to do with our project, is like try to group voices together and find like issues that the community has, and talk about these and engage with these from a feminist lens. But there is frustration, but also an acceptance that things are like this in India. So I really wish, like personally, when I started out in this, looking at COVID, I found this letter that was signed by 35 women scientists working in North America and Europe, that they talked about how they're battling both COVID and patriarchy at the same time. And so they said, of course, we've had barriers, but they are not comparable to the racism and sexism we are seeing in our environments today. And now I'm quoting from this letter that they wrote. And they say, even these lifelong battles for a place in science have left us unprepared for the gendered and racial inequalities we have experienced in response to the COVID pandemic. End quote. In this letter, which I can link you to, it's very easily available. It's on the Times Higher Education .com. And they've also said how, I mean, all these 35 women work on COVID, right? And they have said that despite there being so many women experts in biology, in epidemiology and COVID, they're seeing that a lot of the experts that are being placed on committees are in fact don't know so much about COVID. And they come in through these informal networks that cis men work with. And they're really saddened that the response is so male-centric and in fact dangerous, because non-experts are entering these decision-making bodies where women of expertise are in fact, I mean, biology is supposed to be a very woman-friendly field, right? but the response, of course, uh, is not doesn't think of that. Yeah, and this is all I want to say. Happy to discuss further.
Right. Thank you so much, Ashima. I think this was very useful. I'd like to ask Santan, would you like to add anything to this, because you've been associated with other projects as well in this life of science?
Right,
We'd be
right,
happy.
Poonam.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Ashima has been mostly spearheading all our efforts in terms of understanding how COVID is exacerbating the kind of inequalities that we see. But what I did through this COVID time is that I reached out to a lot of students, and the reason behind that was that I suddenly hear that the final results have been declared by the universities based on internal assessment or the kind of work that has previously, students that they have submitted, the kind of work that they've previously done. All of that included, I hear that the final results have been declared, and then
Lost you, Santan.
Yeah, we've lost your voice. Is there a connection problem?
minds in our
Yeah.
birth homes, in our birth family homes, we're not very good with them. A lot of us, of course. And again, being away from campus has its own impact on how students prepare and work towards their exams. And then, of course, some of you might know that this UGC circular was challenged by multiple petitions in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided to go with the UGC, sort of mandated the UGC to go ahead and work with, sort of put this pressure on universities so that they have to conduct their final year examination. So what I did with the lifeofscience.com is I sort of reached out using a survey where I tried to understand what are the kind of impacts that you're having. So is there a public versus private divide, for example, in how students are being impacted by this decision in the middle of the pandemic? I also reached out trying to understand what is happening to students who come from marginalized communities, be it based on caste, class, gender, sexuality, ability, and a culmination of those. And I also tried to understand as to what would have, given that the universities will have to conduct their examinations, what would be better ways of conducting these examinations, which are more student friendly than others. So what I got from the survey, A, was the public-private divide was very classic. So most private universities seemed to have already resumed examinations and classes on online platforms seamlessly. So students seemed to not even have sort of realized that this is going to become a problem. In fact, and then the other reason that I observed for this public-private divide is the fact that private universities have a very interesting criteria of evaluating students, and also when people are coming in for admissions, they would like, they have very different evaluation criteria, which sort of reduces the importance that they give to NSEM marks. And these NSEM, but the public universities run on a very different structure. The NSEM marks are often, if not always, end all and say all of everything. So the public university students were much worse affected. Most students unanimously agreed to the fact that their mental health has been really bad. And the interesting data that sort of came out from people who were queer, trans, Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi, disabled, were the following: that, for example, for queer trans people, most of them were really under a lot of stress, having to live in home. For people with disabilities, they seemed to be lacking the kind of access that they had in their campuses, where there was a library, and in a lot of public universities now there are computers which can be accessed as by braille. So all of this missing, they were all very worried that they are going to fail their examination. And that's pretty much it. And most of them suggested that they would like internal assessment based NSEM marks, and one faculty who responded to my survey sort of brought in a parallel with what's happening in Israel. So in Israel, students are being given printed copies of the question paper that's being sent home. They're filling it up and they're sort of mailing it back to the university. And that's how the thing's been going on. So a faculty mentioned that this correspondence course kind of a format can be used for examination. So that's pretty much the kind of data that I could gather for my survey, and that's the kind of work that I did.
Thanks very much for this. So may I ask Koil Ghosh to please share with us her work and insights?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Koel. I am the managing trustee of Sapper for Equality, and I identify as a non-binary person. Um, so yeah, COVID, when the entire situation started in the month of March, we were a little taken aback by the entire situation. It was overwhelming. It was overwhelming for us, but with time, we realized that it is time for us to step up and do some substantial work in terms of providing of ration and in terms of financial assistance to the trans masculine community and the non-binary and the PAGFB people, because they were really really suffering at that point of time, because a lot of people um, had not completed their basic education. A lot of people have been compelled to leave their schools and their higher education because of the gender roles that they were, forced and compelled to be in. So a lot of people could not complete their education, which is why they do a lot of odd jobs and had lost out on substantial amount of work, substantial amount of money, and these people were thrown out of their houses before COVID from the natal homes and were forced to live outside, the vicinity of their homes, and uh, basic things like paying rent, paying electricity bills, sustaining themselves was getting very very difficult. Uh, the more we got into it, I realized that the less we understood that we could actually do, because your hands are limited, and after a point of time you cannot really provide for someone's need for a long period of time. We've been doing it for the last 4 months, but we realize that the problem lies somewhere very different, so I have a little bit of a presentation, if I can uh, show. I've just
I think
yeah,
Ruchira can, yeah,
can you,
it's come on.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. We can see,
So
we can see.
yeah, so you see very a lot of trans women, a lot of trans men, and these are people who work in cafes, who work in in garment factories, who work as workers, who beg in streets, who are also involved in sex work. But everything had stopped. It had come to a standstill, because uh, people were thrown out of the jobs. So we realized that for a lot of trans masculine people who were taking their hormones also, even getting those medical help that they take, it was difficult, because you don't have the money to get your own hormones, and there were people who were uh, it was like there were situations where they were asked to leave their rented spaces because they were unable to pay the rent. They were asked to, uh, they were thrown out of their natal house, because they realized that the gender identity was also something that was coming in the forefront. It was no longer that everybody was at home, so the surveillance had also increased a lot. So there were around 7 districts, I think: Kolkata, North 24 Parganas, South 24 Parganas, Hooghly, and Nadia. These are the districts that we try to cover, and we try to help and provide medicines, provide ration, and to combat the suffering, And in August, the cases were, we also had rampant cases of suicide at that point of time. There were a lot of cases where people were compelled to, take away their lives because of, the failing situation. And our helplines were running over time, because there was always such calls of complete distress that were coming, and we were always very scared that someone might do something and we would not be able to save a life. And there was so much of the moment I'm even talking about it right now, uh, it still feels the same way. Every night that we've spent uh, trying to explain to people why it's important to hold on has broken us also in multiple ways, emotionally, mentally. We feel so overwhelmed with this entire situation, and we realize that education is something, and changes in curriculum and changes in the way people uh, you know if we want to give ourselves better lives, we will have to change it from the crux of it, which is from the point of view of education, whether it is redesigning of the curriculum, whether it is training of the teachers, whether it is allowing toilets, which will not have gendered markers on them. Or maybe these were important things, because until and unless you do have a certain kind of educational degree, it is difficult to sustain, especially during times like this. Especially, and I realized that for a community like ours, we can't afford a pandemic. We can't. We are not privileged enough to sustain a pandemic. It is extremely difficult once you are like uh, you are put into so much of marginalization and so much of ostracization for your gender, for your identity, for your sexuality. And on the top of that, your basic right and dignity to live is constantly being challenged. And it is so yeah, so we've tried to do a lot of livelihood programs. We've tried to buy cycles for people, but we know that this is not enough. There's so much more that needs to be done, and it needs to be done from the basic level of education, and then moving on to providing sustainable livelihoods. Inclusive workspaces are something that are the need of the hour, I think. So yeah, so that's what. And there were also positive experiences where people have stood up to the occasion, and people have come out and volunteered day in and day out and worked with us. And we've seen a lot of community support during this point of time. We've seen people really standing up for each other when the crisis has arisen. So it has been a very it's an emotional roller coaster that we've gone through this few months, and it's still continuing. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say, I think.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Koel. Shall I ask Shalab from HAK, who would like to share the work with us and been working in the area of child rights for a long time?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Batra. I mean, it was so. At the same time, it was like I felt I resonated with everybody like who had already spoken. When it comes to children, the situation is very precarious. I mean, children have always been, you know, put at the back seat because they don't form the political agenda. They don't vote. So issues of children have always seen a kind of flag, and it gets only worse when pandemic hits, when a disaster happens. So the same happened with children this time again. And to begin with, children were and the issues of children were hit out on multiple fronts. When you talk of education, we all know that the primary response was to closure of all the institutions, all the schools. And yes, that was kind of important at that time. uh, Not denying that, because the safety concerns were really high. But at the same time, what needed to be done to put in the alternative system, which the government, the system failed. When we move to from education to children and child protection aspect of it, yes, they were just left without any support. I mean, for example, there was a rush. Different services or services were categorized as essential commodities or essential services, but something like Childline, which actually works at addressing the distress call or addressing the issues of child protection, they were not considered or declared as essential services. So every time any childline worker had to go and seek permission to get out and respond to any call. So we have seen that kind of uh, prioritization or deprioritization, as I may say, that has also taken place. Education, I mean, we have all heard the sad news of children committing suicides because of not being able to access the online education. And government has been boasting about, that online education. We have brought in online education, and that's the new normal. I mean, you talk about every part of the country. You talk of Kashmir, which still has 2G connection. They still face and for a matter of fact, India had the maximum number of internet shutdown in 2019, and it's Supreme Court of India has acknowledged it. So we are coming from there. Like uh, households in India, they have like average 8 hours of electricity. 30% of only 30% of women or female, they have been able to uh, access internet or a mobile device. We have such kind of infrastructure disparity, and there we were trying to say that online education is the new normal, and we all need to adapt to that. We have all seen the fate of children who were appearing for board examination, and how the court has also a kind of taken a mid path to get out of the situation. So uh, moving from there, if you look at judiciary, I mean, the pandemic had brought the whole system at halt. And yes, it was not foreseen, but it was expected that the system will get back uh, on at least functioning, and on at least addressing the issues of marginalized people at least. Courts were not working. We work very closely with child victims of sexual abuse, and the courts are not functioning. In fact, uh, as per the Delhi High Court rulings, we have had certain landmark judgments where it is said that whenever the accused of sexual offense, it's the cases are tried under POXO Act. So whenever a bail application is uh, put up, it's the court's duty to inform the victim or the representative of victim. During pandemic, at least in the beginning of 1.5 or 2 months, we saw that all the under trial prisoners were given or they were enlarged on bail, because Supreme Court had come up with a direction that because of pandemic, the jails need to be decongested, right? So in light of that direction, the courts were granting bail here and there, and like they were not even consulting victims of sexual offenses. And we did like a small research. We collated a data that in how many cases victims were not even issued any notice. They were not informed about their perpetrator being enlarged on bail, and we approached High Court. And yes, after much of a fight, we did receive a positive order where the court again reinforced and reiterated the fact that the victims need to be informed. And since then, we have been seeing some positive changes. But it's all about how the system is itself enabling these kind of categorization, these kind of inequalities, and that needs to be tackled. That needs to be considered. I'll give you a very small example. Like we work very closely, and we in fact, Huck was the first organization which started looking at budget for children. I mean, looking at budgets from children's point of view and children's rights. And since then, we have been carrying out this exercise. uh, Children receive just 3.26% of the whole union budget, which in itself is a questionable thing, on one hand. And why it is important to talk about it now, because now new education policy that talks about spending 6% of GDP on education, right? But the overall expenditure on children's issues is like just 3.26% of the total union budget, right? Then the pandemic hits. Now, very smartly, Department of Finance, they created a kind of categorization of expenditure. So they created three kind of categories: category A, B, and category C. So category A were those departments and ministries which are addressing the issues of pandemic. They were like involved in public health. They were involved in all kind of essential services. Category B and category C were such ministries and departments and expenditures which they said that it could be kept on hold, or their expenditure could be reduced to just 15%. Surprisingly, Ministry of Women and Child Development and Ministry of Human Resource Development, they both are like very very important ministries and nodal ministries. They were put under category C, so their expenditure were uh, limited to 15% of what they have been allocated. So we thought, okay, fine, this is the first quarter of expenditure. Maybe they will get back to the normal expenditure pattern. And there is a whole list of ministries which were put under different categories: Ministry of Women and Child Development specifically, and Ministry of Human Resource Development, MHRD and MWCD. They were put under category C, along with other ministries as well. But why I'm saying these two ministries are important, because from children's rights point of view, they are the nodal ministries. And if you talk of education, they are the MHRD is the nodal ministry for education expenses also. So while the whole shift was to create a safe environment for children, the expenditures were cut down heavily. So these were the quite disturbing facts which we see that how the government is prioritizing its own mandates. So that has something disturbed us. In pandemic, as I mentioned, that we had gone to High Court, and we challenged the whole function, the way of functioning of trial courts in Delhi vis-a-vis victims of child sexual abuse. So that has been one aspect of our working during pandemic. Uh, as pandemic hit, we all had to respond to the situation, and relief work was something which we all got into, and uh, then we've been able to reach out to terrains like Kashmir, Uttar Pradesh, where we have specifically reached out to those families and communities uh, uh, led by single women household, where there are migrants. So all kind of relief work has been going on. Uh, on administrative side, we also thought that because the Supreme Court had said that all the jails and childcare institutions, both, they needed to be decongested, and they said that children need to be restored back to their respective families. So we did a letter petition. We wrote to the Juvenile Justice Committee of Delhi High Court, and we apprised them of the situation and the difficulties of children they face uh, if this decongestion of childcare institution is implemented blindly. So our recommendations and suggestions were taken up by JJC, by Juvenile Justice Committee of Delhi High Court positively. They also directed the Department of Women and Child Development of Delhi government to fix some honorarium for children, those who are going back to the families, so that they do not become an additional economic burden on the families, which is already struggling with the pandemic situation. So all kind of challenges we've been facing, and yes, one needs to be hopeful and stay positive. uh, and it's the landscape of working with children are going to be difficult, and it's getting much more difficult day by day.
Thanks very much, Shalab. I think, yes, it's true. And I actually didn't know this, that, Ministry of Resource Development, now that they're calling it Ministry of Education, in the NEP and Family and Child Welfare has actually reduced its expenditure to 50% during the pandemic. That's absolutely crazy.
And this was extended to quarter 2 and quarter 3 expenditure as well. So it did not just stayed there for quarter 1 expenditure, but they extended it to following quarters as well. And now it's very essential here that NEP talks about 6% of GDP to be spent on education. Now, and then 14th Finance Commission recommendations have already kicked in, where Central union government is saying that states have greater autonomy to decide what they want to spend on, right? So they need to prioritize their own revenue where they want to invest. Now, the states will say that we do not have enough funds, and expenditure is anyways, allocations are going down, expenditure will go down. So that's a kind of opening for private players as well to pitch in
Absolutely.
here. It's like
Absolutely.
just opening up a Pandora box
Yeah.
where private players are going to come in like heavily, and they will
Mm.
have the most of the say
Yeah.
in all the state of affairs. So I
Yeah.
don't know, I
Yeah.
mean, whether to feel good about it or what, but I definitely do not see it as a positive move.
No, there are lots of challenges. I think we'll come to some more insights with regard to your work and others. So shall I now ask Rituparna? Rituparna, would you like to share your views and of course the specific work that you've been engaged with during this time? Yeah, thanks.
So, thank you. So I go by she, her, hers pronoun, and I work with an organization called Nazaria, which is a queer feminist resource group. And one of the work that we do is conducting workshops in colleges, in schools, and universities. And the second one is, and among other things, we do crisis intervention work also. So when there is domestic violence that happens in the natal families, we help with legal support and all. So when the first nationwide lockdown was announced, it impacted the LGBTQIA people in different ways. First of all, income generation was stalled. Domestic violence at home rose for a lot of queer people, and the lockdown posed a threat to accessing safe space, thereby causing mental trauma and distress. So, I'll be talking about what has been the policy level and what has been the government doing also, and also what has Nazaria been doing. So, Nazaria's efforts has been to address the three important things that have happened. The crisis that have happened is in terms of income generation, domestic violence, and accessing safe spaces. So we raised funds. We raised around 4 lakhs fund, and we distributed money for 3 months to around 72 people, trans masculine, trans feminine, and queer persons in and around North India, and also some in other parts of the country. This with it, and also what happened is that we run a helpline. So the helpline used to run, we used to run helpline from Monday to Friday. Now we had to extend the helpline to Saturday from 10 to 6 p.m. because the number of calls rose. So earlier the number of calls were like 2 to 3 calls a week, and during the pandemic, during the lockdown, we received almost double the call rates. And in one week, the calls were around 17 in a week, which was and most of the calls talked about the nature of the calls are suicidal, which is weekly we got suicidal calls, severe mental health issues, that's weekly, and the grievances include parents passing homophobic and transphobic comments, surveillance of their movements, what they wear. Some are also forced to wear clothes that they conform, forced to wear clothes which conform to their gender assigned at birth, which they do not conform to because they are gender transgressive, non-binary people, and they are forced to wear clothes that conform to the gender assigned at birth. Who they talk to and what TV shows that they watch. Now, for some people, TV shows might be a very ये क्या बात है मतलब TV shows, but for queer people and trans persons, TV shows really impact a lot in terms of queer representation in the media and to feel less alone. And some people also spoke about having no money to recharge their phones. Now, what happened during the lockdown is that people rely a lot on peer support. Now, not being able to talk to your peer support, talk to your friends, talk to your lovers, talk to people is a big mental health stressor. There are also instances of being forced to undergo conversion therapy. People talked about privacy to reach out for emotional support. So, Nazaria, we provide for free um, um, mental health counseling with three first we had one counselor, then during the lockdown we hired one more counselor, then after that we hired one more counselor because the mental distress of queer and trans people really increased. And so we give 45 minutes each to each person, but because there was no privacy, we had to change the method, and our counselors agreed to at least talk to them for 5 to 10 minutes, which is not a usual practice, but we had no other options. There was also physical and mental violence by husbands against queer women. So to be honest, there are many queer cis women who are married, and because marriage is a sacred and an important institution according to the society, so we had such cases also, and forcing queer women to have online meetings with prospective grooms. So for parents, this was an opportunity to trap queer female assigned at birth persons to have meetings with prospective grooms. Like this is what technology has done to people. And in terms of gender affirmative surgeries has been stalled because the medicines, the hormonal treatment that people used to take was not regarded as an important essential medicine during that time. So many hormonal medicines had to be stopped. Our ARTs were not provided to many trans women and gay men, and this was also a cause of distress.
Sorry, what is ARPs?
The artificial treatment for HIV.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah. So what happened is, in terms of in the country, what happened is there was a suicide case which there was someone called Anjana Harish who died by suicide because they were forced into conversion therapy by family and by the medical institution. Many groups wrote to the government about banning such conversion therapies. And there was a lesbian suicide that happened during the lockdown in Tamil Nadu. There were many instances of lesbian suicides in Uttar Pradesh, in Muzaffarnagar, in Uttar Pradesh. In Guwahati, there was an instance of a gay couple committing suicide. So these are some of the suicide incidents that we heard of. So what happened in terms of a crisis intervention work was that because of lockdown and because of ban on interstate travels, we had to rely a lot on the police station of the state. So once when a couple was facing violence from a nearby state, we had to call 181. And the normally in such times they would easily come cross border and come to Delhi, and we would provide protection from the courts or from the police. But because of interstate ban, they couldn't come to Delhi and they had to go back to the abusive parents, which caused a lot of distress. And later on, when the lockdown was lifted, they again tried to leave the households, and they managed to leave the household. So in that way, our crisis intervention work really suffered because of COVID fear. Not many couples, not many queer and trans people could leave the abusive households, and there were no. So normally the shelter home. So we work with women's shelter home in Delhi, and they used to give shelters to queer women, queer cis women. But because of COVID, the shelter homes were also shut. So when such women used to leave homes, then all we had to do was open our doors, our staff members' doors, which was not safe for us in many, many ways. But we had no other option but to open our doors and have them in our homes, where police used to come and violate many of the staff members' houses, and parents used to come and do a lot of stuff, which we did also. In terms of the trans community, what happened is that um, uh, uh, I think on May 11th, a petition was filed in Kerala High Court for protection of transgender community against discrimination in the grant of relief measures during COVID-19. The petitioner Anira Kabir, a trans person, submitted that since the nationwide lockdown on March 25, the trans community has been facing a lack of access to essential food supply, medicines, and treatment. Many trans people also face a lot of unemployment because shops were not uh, uh, um, working, and also more than 87% of the trans women are dependent on traditional forms of livelihood like badai, like earning money by giving blessing during private celebration, which also stopped. And then so sex work and begging also stopped during the lockdown. This happened, and so more than 2,000 people wrote a letter to the Ministry of Finance, Home Affairs and Social Justice on April 29, 2020, demanding that lakhs of trans people need money, and demanded a subsistence income of at least 3,000 rupees per month to each trans person. The National Institute of Defense, which comes under MOSJ, provided rupees 1,500 to around 4,500 trans people from different states. It's a very small proportion to at least, according to 211 census, there's 4.88 lakhs trans persons, and there might be many more. Given the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana announced by the finance minister did not make any reference to the trans community at all. What other thing happened during this time is that during the COVID time was a blow to the trans community and its allies. On April 18, 2020, the government of India released the draft rules on trans person protection of rights when the country was in lockdown. And many trans people wrote to them saying that you cannot ask people now to give recommendation because it's a lockdown time, and the rules were finally passed in September 20 something, if I'm not right, Shanta, if I'm not wrong, 20 something, no, 20th of September, the draft rules were passed. So you see how the government is also playing like all this while not providing relief to the trans community, while not acknowledging the trans community in their policies. They have gone ahead and published the trans rules, and so on and so forth. In terms of Nazaria's work, what we managed to do is to file petitions in several high courts. So we couldn't go ourselves, but in Uttarakhand High Court, for instance, we filed a habeas corpus where there was a lesbian couple, and the girlfriend was not allowed to meet the other partner, and the partner was living with the parents. And the Uttarakhand High Court passed a judgment saying that even though same-sex couples may not be eligible to tie the knot yet they have the right to live together. So this is one of the things that we did. And recently, while doing crisis intervention work, so earlier during the lockdown, police did not take written complaints. Complaints, we have to submit it by post, and they will give us protection orders after a couple of days, which was a threat to many couples or many queer and trans people, because there was a gap of few days to get the protection order. Now, since last 2 months, we have been getting such protection orders directly from the police station without delay or without any gaps in between. So this has happened, and we got a protection order recently from the police to protect a gender fluid person. So these are some of the things that we have come across. One of the things that we found out, and in the see the GNEP NEP was released, and there was no mention of sexuality education. There was no mention of though the NEP talks about inclusive education, but there was no mention. There is no mention of LGBTQI persons. This is one thing that we have noticed, that the government is definitely not pro queer and trans people. And the National Council for Trans Persons was formed without any consultations from the community. And there is a petition now in Guwahati High Court challenging that National Council, where they have the petitioner has asked the government to take into cognizance the fact that they are trans people from different regions, and all needs to be represented in the National Council. I think, and while realizing that the trans and the queer community wants a safe space, we Nazariya have been trying to provide an online safe space, but it is impossible to reach out to the working class people because of lack of internet connection, stable internet connection, or internet connection. So most of the people who have come to this online safe space meetings are mostly people from the upper class, people who can afford an internet, people who can afford privacy, which is a very, and this whole emphasis on digitization, whole emphasis on digital literacy is something very worrying for some of the organizations who work with working class and with queer and trans community, because for us, privacy is a big issue, and accessing such digital platform is a big issue. So I can talk about more when there are questions later on.
Thank you. Thank you, Rituparna. I think that gave us some pretty good insight into the kind of challenges this community is facing, and of course, the silence in a sense, and maybe an inert kind of a response from the state. We should thank everybody, really, and it's been very, very heartening and also sort of very sad to hear these stories, which I think there's going to be a huge struggle ahead of us. But whatever we can do, at least through the report, through the research that we are doing, we're going to bring it out, we're going to disseminate. IHS has already produced one report actually on looking at the impact of COVID on migrant workers. They've been doing a lot of work in different cities. And we're hoping that we'll be able to bring all your voices in a meaningful way in this report as well.